Uh, BRB. All right, well, welcome back everybody to our third lecture on the psychology of well-being. I hope you've all been thinking about the insights that you've learned throughout the past week and all your biases, and you're going to be able to use them. This week, we're going to have some actual concrete intentional strategies that you guys can use. And so you're going to have lots of homework this week, so be prepared. But just to kind of go through, again, just a reminder of where we were. First lecture, we went through all these misconceptions about happiness, these things that we think make us happy, but we don't. Last week, we talked about why our expectations are so bad. We did a little bit of a swap on the third one here, because today, what I realize is that part of the stuff that's going to make us happy is actually finding ways to overcome our biases. And so this is going to be the first week we are getting concrete strategies of like actually making yourself happy. But the real shocking stuff that makes you happy is going to come next week. And I keep switching around, but we'll keep you on your toes. Back to our review. We started in the beginning with all this stuff that we think of as our goals that make us happy, and we said most of these don't make us as happy as we think. And we inserted this new term of miswanting, this idea that we don't want we're wanting the wrong stuff, and we are sort of miswanting stuff that we don't necessarily think is going to make us happy or that doesn't make us as happy as we think, and we're not wanting all the good stuff. And so we asked last time, why does this miswanting occur? Why are our minds so messed up? And we said, indeed, our minds are messed up. There are all these annoying features that seem to be leading us astray. And we went through a couple of these different ones. We said our minds have these intuitions that are often really, really wrong. We have to fight against that. We saw that our minds are not thinking in terms of absolutes. They're judging relative to these reference points, and that messes us up a lot because we're often comparing against reference points that aren't good. We also learned that our mind has this really terrible tendency to get used to stuff. And in fact, there's this corollary that we don't even realize that our minds do this, but it does this all the time. That means that the stuff that starts out as being good stops being good really soon because we kind of get used to it. And so we ended last time with this question of like, how can we overcome these annoying features? What strategies can we use to do this? And that is what we're going to reveal and talk about today, how we can overcome these annoying features or these cognitive biases. And we're going to do that in a particular way, which is we're going to use a set of strategies that we can intentionally use to overcome our biases. And I'm putting that word intentionally kind of in bold and in color, in part because this is the part that really matters. Our minds are naturally not going to want to use any of these strategies. These are the things that we need to do effortfully and intentionally to make things better. And we're kind of hearkening back to the quote that we started with in our first lecture, in this How of Happiness lecture by Sonia Lyubomirsky, who sort of talked about how we have this pie chart of the things we can intentionally control. And she notes that we have this, with these intentional, effortful activities, we can have a powerful effect of how happy we are, even much more so than our genetics or much more so than our circumstances. But it's these things, intentional, effortful, they're not going to be habits immediately. We're going to have to work to get them to be that, right? And so with that, we sort of jump into these strategies that you're going to intentionally use. And as I said at the beginning, this is going to be your homework. You're to be thinking about these things really in terms of habits that you can implement this week and which ones will actually work for you. But we're going to kind of go backwards through strategies that help the biases from the reverse direction. And if you recall, the main thing we were focused on at the end last time was this idea that we get used to stuff and that sucks because we get used to the stuff that's really good in our lives and we want to kind of feel it being new and so on. And so how can we, in some sense, get over getting used to stuff, overcome this horrible thing of hedonic adaptation, this idea that like we are happy at first when we get something, but that happiness goes away. Just as a reminder for folks who missed last time, we saw lots of graphs that look like this. We have this awesome thing that makes us happy, something like marriage, and it makes us happy for a little bit, and then over time that happiness goes down. And what we saw is that basically happens in like all these awesome cases, from like having an awesome job to having tons of money, getting into Yale, as you guys all laughed about. Did you wake up this morning and say, holy cow, oh my God, I'm at Yale? I bet very few of you did that because hedonic adaptation. And all this hedonic adaptation, we have to awesome stuff. But how can we use strategies to overcome this stuff, right? We'll start at the bottom on strategies we can use to stop hedonic adaptation for awesome stuff, because the awesome stuff that we talk about is a particularly insidious thing. Stuff is usually like a thing that we buy, a nice car, a new house, and it has this terrible feature where it's not really dynamic at all. It doesn't change at all, and it sticks around, and that means stuff that we buy is sort of the worst culprit of our hedonic adaptation. And so when we think about the strategy we're going to use, it's going to be that we're going to stop investing in stuff in the first place. From now on, as you think about the kinds of things you can do to make yourselves happy, think about not investing in awesome stuff as much. Why? Well, as we were saying, first of all, it doesn't make us as happy as we think. We think the new house is going to make us super, super happy, but in practice it doesn't. And it doesn't in part because it sticks around. It's the same house day in and day out, and we kind of just get used to it. Same thing with all the other awesome stuff we have, awesome cars and so on. They end up sticking around, and that means we get bored with them. And there's a wonderful quip by the psychologist Dan Gilbert, who you heard about last time. It's part of us believe that the new car is better because it lasts longer. But in fact, that's the worst thing about the new car. It will stay around to disappoint you. This is the problem with stuff that sticks around. We get used to it. And so the new car, it hangs out, we stop paying attention to it. Like the longer it lasts, in some sense, the more time we have to get used to it, which is sort of boring. And so the first strategy we're going to think of, and this is for thinking about new things in your life, is don't invest in stuff. Invest instead in things that are not going to stick around, namely experiences. What do I mean about experiences? But just like anything you could pay money to that gives you happiness, that's not a thing, that's like something you experience. So going on vacation, or spending some time in an awesome art gallery, or going to Europe to check out the wonderful paintings there, or going to a concert, even something short like going out to eat or enjoying sort of a delicious dessert. Those are the kinds of things that are experiences, and they're not going to stick around. You're not going to have time to adapt to them. And Dan Gilbert also quips about this. He notes, a new car sticks around to disappoint you, but a trip to Europe is over. It evaporates. It has the good sense to go away and leave you with nothing but your wonderful memory. And it seems like our intuition is like, well, why would we want to invest in an awesome vacation? We could get a car. That car is going to stick around and be useful to us in the future. But again, this is a spot where our minds are kind of giving us the wrong feedback. We actually get more happiness than we expect out of experiences. Like the fact that the vacation is only a week long is a good thing. Like the fact that you can't be in this room looking at this art for very long means you don't have time to get used to it. Same thing with a concert. I think the longest concert I went to was 3 hours, and that was good. If it lasted any longer, it'd be terrible. Same thing with like, a delicious glass of wine. Some of you want it to keep going, but if it kept going, that would be bad. You actually want stuff that goes away. And so that's the intuition, that experiences should make us happier because they go away. But is this really true? Are people who invest in experiences actually happier? Like, is it the case that people who buy more of these are happier than people who buy more of that? Right? And for individual people, if you were to invest in experiences over stuff, would you feel happier? Well, this is what Leif Van Boven and Tom Gilovich studied. They actually had people come in and say, think about an experiential or a material purchase you made that's over $100. So you can think about this, and specifically something you bought to make you happy, not something like, not some textbook that you had to buy because you had to. Like, think of something that you've ever spent that like actually you got to be happy, right? It says, when you think about this, how happy does it make you? Just like very simply, like, does it make you not at all happy or very much? And they asked other things like, how good of an investment was it, and so on. And so here's what they find is that when you think about how happy it makes you, how happy does it make you? Well, you get higher ratings for just thinking about the experiential purchase. Does it contribute to your happiness now? Like, even like still when you think back to it, does it contribute? Yes, these numbers are bigger for experiences. And also, like, was it money well spent in retrospect? Like, did you actually think it was a better use of your money? And what you find is that yes, it was. So all these measures of happiness, both at the time and retrospectively, you think of experiences as better. What they worried about in this first paper, though, was like, well, maybe that's just like for all of us, like very well-off people. We're all here at Yale. We have lots of awesome stuff. Maybe we have as much awesome stuff as we need, and therefore, like, getting new awesome stuff isn't going to help us. Like, so we might as well invest in experiences. But the idea is like maybe people from lower incomes or people who don't have as much stuff, maybe if they got stuff that would make them happier. So maybe it's like really just a function of being, a richer kind of folk that we get this. And so to test this, they looked across different financial incomes to say, does this pattern hold across everybody? And here was what they found. That hash marked bar is the different experiences that you purchase. And what they find is that every level of income, experiential purchases make us happier than material. Material ones, but it does in fact get bigger as you get to higher and higher salaries. So again, thinking back to what we learned the first time, most of your median incomes is going to be around $76,000. Like, you guys are definitely going to be way better off investing in experiences than in material stuff. And so it does seem like investing in experiences is good, but there's a couple other ways that investing in experiences allow us to get over our hedonic adaptation. And one of these is that when we're thinking about purchasing different experiences, so when you're like sitting at your computer doing your problem set and you're thinking about your spring break vacation, that can actually make you very happy, right? And so researchers hypothesize that maybe this is another way that experiences help us, is that even before we have the experience, the anticipation of it, thinking about it, actually gives us a little happiness boost. Is this really true? Well, this is what Kumar and colleagues tried to look at. They had people think about some experiential or material purchase you plan to make soon. So you could say, think about the next kind of big purchase you're going to make, either a thing or like some sort of experience that you plan to have. And you say, how does the anticipation of this purchase make you feel? And they said, are you feeling kind of happier, like you're feeling more excited? Or is the kind of feeling of anticipation bad? Is it more like impatience? And then they also very explicitly had people rate whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. And so what do you find? Well, what they found is that If you look at the excitement levels, they're higher for experience than material, so it's more like excitement and less like kind of impatience to get it. And if you look at the pleasantness, it's almost like 2.5 times as pleasant to think about the fact that you're gonna go on this cool ski trip or the fact that you're gonna go to this awesome concert than it is that you're gonna buy a new pair of shoes or a nice Canada Goose jacket or something like that. Thinking about these experiential purchases makes us really happy. Finally, it seems like we really look forward to these experiential purchases in a way that we might not. And just the fact that you're a person that tends to do that tends to think about your future experiential purchases, that might make you happier than tending to be a materialistic person that tends to think about your next material purchases. And to test this, they use this cool technique that we'll see a few times in this course, which is called experience sampling. Basically what they do is they get people's cell phone number and they give them a little app, and every once in a while throughout the day, they'll send them a little blip that says check in and answer these questions. And usually they'll just ask something simple like, how happy are you feeling right now on a scale of 1 to 100? And this lets them tag, okay, what are the kinds of things you're doing in your day? Just a random day that let you think in terms of what's making you happy. And so if you said, you give your happiness rating and then they ask you this question, hey, what were you thinking about? And you can go through, I was thinking about lunch, I was thinking about this stuff. Some people, just by chance, will be thinking about a future purchase. And they say, oh, that's great, now you're in our sample. And they say, was it causing you to experience excitement or impatience? Was it causing you to be pleasant or unpleasant? And then they tag what the purchase was. Was it a material purchase or an experiential purchase? And so here's what we find sort of mapping across these mean happiness ratings. That bar at the top is how happy you are. And what you find is when I ping you and I say, how happy are you? If you happen to be thinking about an experiential purchase, if you're thinking about the ski trip that's coming up, you are just necessarily happier than if you happen to be thinking about a material purchase that you were thinking of. And this is sort of coded for how much that purchase cost. So already we're seeing this happiness effect. But we see that that's because of two different things. One is that experiential purchases are making us feel more excited and less impatient. It's kind of like if you just bought this new set of shoes, you kind of want it to come in, you like putting on Amazon Prime, you're like, when is this gonna get here? It feels really impatient. But in the context of experiential purchases, we're feeling excited. And then same thing about pleasantness. They just feel better to wait for these experiential things than not. The sad thing, though, is that this phenomena, which seems to be pretty robust across a couple studies, that we like waiting for experiential purchases and that we're going to like them better, is another thing that falls prey to this thing that our mind delivers to us, intuitions that are just wrong, because we don't actually believe that this is the case. And this is what a set of other researchers looked at. They said, these findings feel wrong to me. Let's check and see if this is really the case. And they had people make predictions, like think about an experiential purchase or a material purchase that you're about to make, and do you think your money is gonna be well spent? You have to forecast that, and then they come back and ask you later, how was it? And so if you're thinking about a forecast before you buy something, you have the intuition that probably some of you are having when I'm telling you these data, which is like, yeah, those studies are all well and good, but that's not what I feel about my purchases. In fact, people are forecasting that they're going to be about half as happy with an experiential purchase as a material purchase. They forecast that they're going to think it was half as good money less spent. But when you actually look at people's real post-consumption ratings, they're higher 2 weeks after post-consumption for the experience and even 4 weeks after post-consumption. Long after this thing has evaporated away and you still have that stuff that you bought, you're still happier with that experience that you've had before. But again, we don't seem to realize it. And so with that, we can say one strategy already that all of you should adopt moving forward for all your future purchases to make you happy, which is that because you don't adapt to experiences, they're gonna make you happier than stuff will. Even if your intuition is telling you otherwise, that's just wrong. Really, you're gonna be happier thinking about experiences. So as you think about how you're gonna treat yourself by buying yourself stuff, switch it around. Think of a cool thing to do, ski trip and so on. Think of free things to do that are experiences, and then you save money on top of it. Anyway, great individual strategy to get you going. But that works for, and so it's actually worth noting that experiences are better than stuff, not just because you don't adapt to them. They're actually better for other reasons too, which makes this one of the most powerful techniques you're gonna learn about in this course. One of the reasons they're better than stuff is that when you tell people about your experiences, it's just way more fun for everybody else than when you tell people about your stuff, right? So imagine like you hear about somebody's cool ski trip. That's actually fun. But when you hear about somebody's new Canada Goose jacket and how warm it's making them, that's just like boring and it kind of sucks. And it turns out that this is one of the reasons that experiential purchases are better, is that it helps other people resonate with you. To test this, Leif Van Voven and colleagues actually did this study where they had friends rate hearing about other people's experiential or material purchases. And if you have them rate your overall impression of that person, that is higher after talking about experiences than material stuff. If you have other friends rate how psychologically well-adjusted are you, you get people to think you're much more psychologically well-adjusted if you invest in experiences than material things. And here's one of my favorite slides you'll see today. This is a list of the adjectives that people spontaneously talk about after their friends told them about a material purchase or an experiential purchase. And you can see much more kind of negative ones on that side. You know, he's self-centered. 33% of people after hearing what this say, oh, he's self-centered, he's insecure, blah, blah, blah. But over here it's like, oh, he's humorous and friendly and open-mindedness. You actually make people think you're twice as humorous by investing in experiences. And so this is kind of additional reason, not even about hedonic adaptation, why experiences are better, is like people just dig you better if you're the kind of person that invests in experiences. But there's a final reason, which harkens back to something we talked to last time, that experiences are better than material stuff, and that experiences are less susceptible to social comparison. It's harder to compare your ski trip versus somebody else's ski trip. It's much easier to compare your car versus somebody else's car. And that means that if we're the type of people who invest in experiences, we're less susceptible to social comparison. And we know this from a cool study by Howell and Hill, who actually did the normal things, talk about an experience or a material purchase you just made, and do all these ratings for it about your happiness. And when they do that, when they ask you about how happy it made you, how was this money well spent, and so on, they find the same kind of thing that everybody else finds. They kind of replicate these other findings where experiential purchases are also better. But they find two other things that have to do with your social relations after that. The first is, did that purchase make other people happier? Or was it just you? And here you're starting to see an even bigger effect, that experiential purchases just seem to make other people happy. Sometimes it's because they include other people in a way that stuff often doesn't. Sometimes it's just you telling people about your crazy experience and it makes other people happy. But even more important is the fact that when you take measures of social comparison, do you feel socially, you do kind of compare your experiences versus somebody else? Do you feel envious of somebody else? Now that's the only spot where these measures start to flip. And so you're just less likely to socially compare your experiences with others. And that means one of those annoying features of your mind that's constantly making you feel less good about what you have isn't in operation for experiences in the same way it is for stuff. And so all these things suggest that the first strategy you can do to kind of make yourself happier is to invest in experiences rather than stuff. If you move forward with all your purchases into the future doing that, you're going to be better off. Problem though is that if we go back to our list of things that we have hedonic adaptation for, like awesome stuff that we're going to buy, fair enough, I can use this strategy. But what about for everything else, right? You already may have, eventually you're gonna have a marriage or you're gonna have a great job, you're already here at Yale. You might have awesome stuff that you already have that you can't sell now to buy experiences, you just have it. And so how do you thwart hedonic adaptation for these other kinds of things? Well, you are in luck because now we have even more strategies that we can use to sort of stop adaptation in its tracks. And we're going to go through a couple of these phenomena of sort of savoring your experiences, what I'm going to call negative visualization, a strategy that Lyubomirsky and colleagues have called make this day your last, and we're going to spend lots of time on the last one, which is experiencing gratitude, which some of you said was one of your signature strengths. That's good. We'll all be boosting this signature strength this week. But let's start with savoring. What do I mean by savoring? Well, in this psychological context, when I'm talking about savoring, I'm going to be talking about this act of stepping outside your own experience to kind of review and appreciate it, right? So when we have a good experience, when we're eating ice cream, some of you might have had some of the goodies that are outside, one of the delicious cookies and so on, you can just have that experience. Or you could kind of be mindful as you're having it and sort of realize that it is that experience. You could have the moment where you realize this is actually a good, delicious experience. I am eating some glucose that is tasting really good right now. And you could have this moment of realization where you're this is really awesome. This is the phenomena of savoring. And it turns out that savoring does a couple things. One is it forces you to actually notice and enjoy that experience and keep your attention on it. Our attention is this horrible beast that's going to be moving around all the time. You can be eating your cookie thinking about like what your problem set is and so on, or you could be eating your cookie realizing that you're having this enjoyable experience. And the latter means you notice things much more. And that means you start higher on your hedonic adaptation curve and it takes you longer to go down. The second reason that savoring is really important is it kind of focuses you on that experience for even longer, and that can also help you prevent adaptation. But is it the case that savoring actually helps you, and what specific strategies can you employ when you're savoring to kind of help you? And so this is a paper by Jose and colleagues who's been looking at this, and they really talk to people who either savor or don't, talk to people who enjoy their experiences or don't, and have them write down the exact things they were doing during that experience that caused them to savor the experience or not. Like specifically, what are activities and things you can be thinking while you're having that experience that help you? And so these are, based on their paper, the full list of the best things you can be thinking that cause you to experience more savoring while you're having that experience. So the first is that you talk to another person about how good it felt. Like you're having this wonderful experience and you tell somebody about it. The other is that you look for people to share it with. You amplify your experience by being with other people. You think about how lucky you are. You kind of experience this gratitude for the experience. You share it later with others. So you think about how you're gonna, like, I'm enjoying it and by myself right now, but as soon as I get out of here, I'm gonna tell someone and it's gonna be super awesome. You show physical expressions of energy. They talk about jumping around or like yelling. You say this, you sort of laugh or giggle because you like it so much. You think about how proud you were specifically for experiences, positive experiences like winning some award or having something that you really like that you can be proud of. And finally, you really were just in the present. You were absorbed in that moment. So all the people who had these experiences of these things, when you do stuff, it's gonna make you savor those activities. Even in simple things, as I said, like we're joking about like the cookies we have here before you guys come in, but if you were thinking about this stuff during that, you would enjoy that experience more. They also look though at activities that kind of decrease or hurt savoring, like things you can be thinking that make the experience less good and that make you savor it less well, that can increase hedonic adaptation. What are those? Well, the main ones that you see are cases where you're not in the present moment, but you're thinking about the future. So I'm focusing on the future. I'm thinking about what's gonna happen when it's over. Like as soon as the cookie's over, then we're gonna have the lecture, like that's bad. Thinking about the future is bad. Reminding yourself it would be over soon. Thinking that it wasn't as good as you hoped. So finding some other reference point and being like, it wasn't as good as I thought. That can really mess you up. Remind yourself that nothing lasts forever. It's never gonna be this good again. I thought it always could be better. Or here's another thing, it's kind of the opposite of gratitude. Like I told myself I didn't deserve this good thing, like a sheer way to kind of make you feel bad. And so what are we seeing? Getting out of the present moment, thinking like finding other social comparisons of why it's not as good, and in particular thinking you don't deserve these things, these are bad and they're gonna reduce your savoring. So try to kind of get more of the former and sort of less of the latter, and that's gonna promote you experiencing positive activities. Another kind of more controversial way to savor is one that folks like Kurtz and colleagues talk about, which is kind of taking images or literally taking pictures of this experience to enjoy it later. This is kind of Instagramming your life. And so this is a mixed bag for two reasons. And the reasons are that you can take photos and enjoy them in two different ways. You can be not being mindful and thinking about all these other things and focusing on your photos, or you can be using your photos to see a different aspect of the thing that you're keeping, sort of learning about new and better properties within it. And so if you're out on your vacation and you're sort of worried about taking this awesome picture and you're kind of not noticing anything, that's really bad. But if you're using the camera as just another lens through which to see things, you're kind of doing the savoring, like I'm so lucky to be here. Like look at how it's even more beautiful than it's just in my eyes. I'm kind of seeing it in a savoring way. Then all of a sudden it can actually boost happiness. So if you're an Instagrammer, if you're the kind of the person who's like using Snapchat and using all these things to kind of think about your experiences, think about the way you're doing that. Are you really doing those savoring things? Or is the act of taking the photos interfering with that? And those two give you very different ways of dealing with your own savoring. Finally, there's nice work on thinking about savoring not just in the moment where you're having this awesome positive experience, but savoring stuff that happened in the past, your memories, and bringing them back. Because it is the case that you can enjoy something in the here and now, but we have this wonderful technique as a human where we can kind of pull up memories from the past and think about them again. And the act of doing that and doing that as a habit seems to really increase happiness. And that's what Sonja Lyubomirsky and her colleagues did. They talked to students and they were asked, not asked, but they were asked to replay their happy memories in their mind for 8 minutes a day for 3 days a week. So you set your timer on your phone, you say for the next 8 minutes, think about a really happy memory that you had. And their exact instructions are, think about the event as though you were rewinding a videotape and playing it back. So for the next 8 minutes, relive the moment when you found out that you got into Yale. Or for the next 8 minutes, pick something that was really fun, like the most fun activity you did in the last year at Yale, and replay what that felt like. And like literally sit there and think about it, right? You might think that this is just this kind of ephemeral thinking about this thing. 8 minutes for 3 days, what's that, 24 minutes total, shouldn't do anything. But it turned out it had really huge effects on subjective well-being. In fact, the people in this study actually increased their positive emotions 4 weeks later. So 4 weeks later, I survey you, and the idea is still then you're having more positive emotions than if you didn't do this intervention. So this is the idea of the power of savoring. Really experiencing our stuff in the moment and thinking about it and being there and being present can help us. And even if you missed it then, kind of going back and replaying the good stuff can actually lead to happier moments. So that's one way to break your adaptation. Be there, be present, recall it back so it comes back, you haven't gotten used to it, and then that's a great way to kind of feel better. The next one is what researchers and folks refer to as sort of negative visualization. You're kind of thinking about the reverse that could have happened. And the best example of this is the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Some of you have seen It's a Wonderful Life, this holiday movie. But basically the plot is that Jimmy Stewart kind of imagines what his life would be like if he were never born, like if it had never happened, right? And he sees that like had he never been born, all these really wonderful things wouldn't have happened and he couldn't have affected people's lives in a positive way and so on. It sounds cheesy, but it turns out that these like cheesy Jimmy Stewart movies were kind of onto something, that actually doing the habit of negative visualization, thinking about what things would have been if they didn't go that way, can cause you to kind of break out of your hedonic adaptation because you realize like, wow, I really do enjoy these things, and you're kind of back at the top of the curve. And this is what Koo and colleagues did. They did this in the context of romantic relationships, another spot where we see lots of hedonic adaptation. And they brought couples in, and for 15 minutes, they had to write about how they might have never met their partner. And they have this prompt that's like, you know, things in life are just kind of like ephemeral. Like, think of the ways, like all the things that could have gone wrong when you never met your partner. Like, it's such a surprise that you got together, so unlikely. Talk about all these other worlds you might not have met them. And then they ask all these measures of subjective happiness, how much you love your partner, and so on. In contrast, the controls just wrote about how they met. So tell me how you met, and think about that. But you're not thinking about the possibility that like, wow, there was like a huge, huge probability that I might not have met this person ever, right? And what do they find? Well, what they find is when you look at happiness ratings, both of marriage and subjective happiness in general, when you wrote about it, how it might not have been, you're getting much higher happiness ratings than in the control where you just write about how it happened. You've been boosting your happiness ratings by about a whole point on this scale, which is pretty huge. And so you guys can kind of do that too. You can think about, you can really like literally go home and write about how you might not have gotten into Yale. What are the subtle things that could have gone wrong that made you just not get in here and you'd be at a different place? And what would that mean for the friendships you made or the stuff that you learned or all the stuff that you got out of this place? You know, by just a small quick of luck of a draw, some of you might not have wound up in Silliman. And like what a tragedy that would be if you didn't like get this awesome courtyard and so on. I might not have wound up in Silliman. You know, if a year later I might have been the head of like Franklin or Murray or something terrible like that, but you might not, sorry for the apologies to those in the room, but you might not have met your suite mates. What was the luck of your draw that let you just happen to meet these particular people and become friends with those particular people, right? All of these things sound a little cheesy, but the act of doing them does an important psychological thing, which is that it breaks you out of the here and now. You're at this point of adaptation with being here at Yale, knowing your friends, being in this college, whatever, and like having the moment where you do this can pop you out of it in this really powerful way. A similar thing to do, although it works in a slightly different way, is this strategy of pretending as though this day was your last. And I don't mean your last in terms of like you have a terminal illness and you kind of have to think about like why everything's great. I'm talking about for specific situations in your life, what if those situations were going to end in like a real way? Like, what if, for example, tomorrow was like you were kind of going to lose this thing that you loved a lot? Like the act of being just about to lose something, where you're just gonna let the balloon go, like that's the moment where you really tend to realize it. And you can simulate and frame the things in your life like that. Like what if, like fast forward, like in 2 more days it's graduation. Like in 2 more days you're leaving Yale, right? Like what are the feelings you're having? What are the things that you're gonna miss? How would you think about that, right? This is exactly the manipulation that researchers use, not at Yale, but at UVA, but I'll give you the Yale version. Kurtz presented to students, he actually did this with seniors at UVA who were just about to graduate, and he framed thinking about how happy they were and how much they loved their friends and how much they loved their classes, either in the normal way, where you just think, how much do you like that stuff, or as something that was about to go away very soon. And so he said, you be taking part in this 10-minute writing exercise. You're gonna write on topics related to your Yale College experience. As you write, keep in mind that you either have a short amount of time or a significant amount of time left to spend at Yale. And he noted, in fact, you have only, because these are seniors, like 1,200 hours, which feels like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna leave really soon. Or, you know, a quarter of a year left, which kind of feels longer because it's a year versus seconds. And so he's framing it either like it's gonna end really soon, or you have a lot of time left. And seniors in the room, just a reminder, you actually have about double that amount of time. You have about 2,400 hours left to be a Yale student. So let that sink in and leave here appreciating this place. But question is, as they wrote that, did students appreciate things more? And so here's what they find. You plot subjective well-being. This is if I just sort of ask you to talk about a typical day in the middle. So like you just kind of talk about your day. It kind of doesn't change very much. If I frame things like you're graduating far away, your happiness actually goes down from pre to post test. But if I tell you, look, you're graduating soon, you have to think about all the good things, your friends and so on, then all of a sudden your subjective happiness is bumping up. Thinking about losing something is the clearest way to pop out of your hedonic adaptation, because you're putting your attention on what was it gonna be like not to have that. And then all of a sudden the good things start popping up because you worry about losing those. And so that's this kind of technique of negative visualization. You're holding this thing, what would it be like if you didn't have it? And so finally, we're gonna end this section with thinking about one of the most powerful techniques for thwarting your adaptation. And we'll see also a powerful technique for resetting your reference points, and that's the phenomena of gratitude. What do we mean by gratitude? Well, we're gonna define it here as a sort of quality of being thankful and this tendency to kind of be appreciative of the things that you have. Like you take the things you have and you not only notice them, but you feel this real sense of thankfulness that you have it. And so it seems like, you know, we go through Thanksgiving and we think about, you know, what we're grateful for, and it's just kind of a thing. But it turns out that it has incredibly powerful psychological effects, even just the act of like listing a few things that you're grateful for during the day. And this was a super famous paper by Emmons and McCullough where they first looked at this. They said, really, could this actually change people's subjective well-being? Just literally writing down 5 things that you're happy about in your life. And so here was the prompt they used with subjects. They said, look, there are many things in our life, both large and small, that we might be grateful about. Think back over the past week and write down on the lines below 5 things in your life that you're grateful for. Just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just. Write this, and you do this once a week for a few weeks. You're either in that condition or you're in a condition that, it sounds funny, but I think this is like what we tend to list all the time, like when we're hanging out with friends or in the dining hall, which is the hassles condition. So these folks said, look, hassles are irritants, things that annoy or bother you. They occur in various domains of life, including relationships, work, school, etc. Think back over today, and then the lines below give us the 5 hassles that occurred to you, right? I feel like this is the thing you complain about with your friends in the dining hall, but you're like listing these 5 hassles. And just to have a control, they actually just had you do an events condition, which is kind of boring. So what were some events that took place over the last week? Just write a few things that had an impact on you down. And what you find in this condition is sometimes people put positive things, sometimes they put negative things. Kind of doesn't matter. because the power of the approach is that gratitude seems to increase subjective well-being relative to these other cases. So if I ask you later, having done this for once a week for a week, how do you feel your life as a whole is going? You get almost a half a point higher. Your whole life as a whole is going better if you think about what you're grateful for. If I ask you kind of how do you think the upcoming week is going to go, so have you think into the future of how you think things are going to go, again, almost a half a point higher with gratitude. Interestingly, if you have any negative physical symptoms, if you're sick or you have things bothering you, those symptoms go down when you're feeling grateful, which is kind of crazy, like that you can actually feel better. But you also put your body through better things. You sort of take better health habits in general. So if I look at just the number of hours you exercise, you're getting almost a whole hour of extra exercise just because you're thinking about the things that are grateful. And here's the power of this gratitude manipulation, is that it's affecting all kinds of things that it shouldn't affect. Writing down 5 things that you're grateful for, probably you don't have the intuition that's going to affect how much you want to exercise in the morning, but it's going to pop you, the data suggests it's going to pop you into wanting to exercise a whole extra hour every week just because you're more grateful. It's pretty crazy. In addition, what we know is that the act of taking gratitude to one next level, not just experiencing yourself, but sharing it, can be even extra powerful. Like, in addition to just writing these 5 things down, if some of the things you're grateful for are other people, what if you actually told them? Like, what if you actually shared, like, look, I'm really thankful for you, this means something to me, with other people? Could that have an effect? Well, this is what Marty Seligman did. He uses this intervention that he calls a gratitude visit, which is that in addition to kind of writing down what you're thankful for, you literally write a letter to somebody about how grateful you are. It doesn't have to be long. It can just be like, you did this nice thing for me. It's just like really meant something to me. And you actually physically go give it to that person. Does that increase happiness? And does it have a long-standing effect? Well, this is what he did. Here's the kind of prompt from the gratitude visit. In the next week, you're to write a letter of gratitude to somebody who's helped you or has been especially kind to you, but you never properly thank them. And you just deliver that letter to the person in question. And it's best if you do this like physically, don't just like email them, like actually physically show up and hand it to them. And what does he find relative to some placebo control where you're kind of thinking about things that make you happy and so on? If you look at pre-test, there's no differences in those conditions. The white bars are the gratitude visit. Here's immediately post-test. There's a huge increase in happiness. But the amazing thing is that this increase in happiness sticks around for a long time. So you visit last week, but a week later, 2 weeks later, 1 month later, even barely 3 months later, you're still seeing this effect of that visit. This one short visit of expressing gratitude can increase your subjective well-being for a long, long time. And this is the power of not just experiencing gratitude, but sharing that with other people. And this kind of thing can increase subjective well-being not just in the context of how you feel, it can actually enhance your personal relationships, such as in the context of actual like romantic relationships like marriage and so on. And so researchers have been looking at whether or not you can use gratitude as an intervention to fix some kind of marital problems that come up. One is a problem of communication. People aren't communicating with the others. They have these behaviors where one spouse is reaching out and the other spouse is not kind of paying attention and so on. And you can kind of categorize couples as like doing that kind of bad communication a lot or not. Are they kind of healthy communicators or not? And you can ask, does gratitude affect that? Can it kind of prevent the problems that even bad communication can have in a marriage? And this is what Barton et al. Looked at. He kind of plotted couples and their communicative styles, and then he looked at whether or not gratitude could help that. And so here's what he finds. He's plotting proneness to divorce. So this is the percentage increase that you have of being more divorce prone across these kind of bad couple indicators. So whether you kind of withdraw, like so high withdrawals are like worse communicators. And what he finds is that if you have a lot of gratitude, you can basically almost nullify the effects of all these other bad things that can happen in your marriage, bad aspects of communication and so on. And so the idea is that the folks who are feeling grateful actually don't see the effects of other bad things in their marriage. And this is just like having gratitude for your partner and being thankful that he's there and expressing it can actually fix other problems that happen to be there too. This happens not just in the context of marriage, but can also happen in a work context. So this is something you guys can use yourself, both in your like jobs that you experience, but also in other interactions you have with people, like doing problem sets together and so on. What Grant and Gino did was to try to see, can just the simple expression of thanking somebody make them work harder? So if you're at your job and your superior comes in and says, thank you so much, I really appreciate your hard work, does that actually make you work harder? And in particular, does it make you work harder in a volunteer context? You're not getting paid extra, you're just doing it out of the goodness of your heart. That was what they tested with fundraisers at a university. And they, half of those folks who were fundraising received this sort of note of gratitude from their superior. Their superior physically came in and said, look, I'm really grateful for your hard work. We sincerely appreciate your contributions to the university. And then they allowed these folks to stick around after and see if they would do extra calls beyond what they're paid for to help the university. And what you find is that these fundraisers who received their gratitude increased their calls by 50%. So you're increasing your work ethic by 50%. 50% more calls are happening just for the simple moment of like one sentence was like, thank you so much for all your hard work. It's like really increases. So I have a moment to thank all our crew who comes here on their Sunday. Thank you guys so much for all your hard work.
I'm going to cut the stream short by 37 minutes.